So since starting the Analytics Accelerator program just over a year ago, which is my mentorship program to take people on the most direct path to working in data, I have spoken individually to over 200 aspiring data analysts to really understand the challenges and goals that people have when they are working to transition into this industry. And those conversations have shown me so much about what are the most common misconceptions and pitfalls that early career data analysts fall into when trying to break into their first data role. A lot of my mentees were in the same exact position dealing with these frustrations just a few months ago. But in the last cohort of my mentorship program, 25% of the 20% cohort actually landed their first data job without previous data experience in under 10 weeks, with an average salary increase of about 30%. So I'm really starting to see what is and isn't working for people in today's really competitive job market. And in today's video, I just wanted to have some real talk with you guys and share some of those insights and be really truthful about where you should be applying your efforts to be able to move into your first data role no matter where you're starting from. And at the end, I want to share some surprising insights about how hiring managers actually feel about portfolio projects based on the feedback that hiring managers and recruiters have given to my students along their interview process. I think a lot of times when people are working to go from having no data experience to being a full-time data analyst, they think of this as taking one massive step. But when you go about it this way, what this results in is usually falling into some of the most common pitfalls and struggles of aspiring data analysts today. One of them is being in this bucket of spraying and praying, which is when you send out tons of resumes and you don't really hear back on much because you're going from having not really relevant experience to applying to these jobs where you're not really even a fit yet. And so I hear a lot of times people are applying to like hundreds and sometimes even thousands of job postings and then getting like less than a 2% conversion rate on their resume. Even for the jobs that you do get interviews for, a lot of times people actually end up failing these interviews or they just get passed up for someone else who has more experience because understandably there is that big gap in their understanding of the day-to-day job. And I think all of this often results in having imposter syndrome and feeling not super confident that you can actually make this jump. And of course, any big life change is a lot harder if you yourself don't actually have self-belief and confidence. The first big idea I want you guys to think about is that becoming a data analyst, and honestly any big life change, requires building a bridge, which means that you need to actually lay the right bricks before crossing. And a lot of times when people think of what these bricks are, they think it's like having a resume and having a portfolio, but it's actually not really that at all. The resume and the portfolio are just the side effect and the result of having the right bricks and the right foundation first. So there's basically three main bricks that I'm thinking about here that I've observed are really the game changers for students in my program. The first one, of course, is having technical skills. We already know all that, but the two other gaps that need to be filled is having experience working in an organization and then also knowing how to deliver real value. When it comes to technical stuff, I'm not going to go super into detail in this video because I want to keep things just a little bit more high level for today, but technical proficiency in the three main tools that data analysts use, that would be Excel, SQL, and of visualization software. So that could be Tableau or Power BI. It really depends on the industry and the region. For example, in the UK, I think Power BI is more popular, but then in the US, Tableau, especially in tech, is a bit more popular. It's more important to be proficient in one visualization software than to know a little bit about all the different ones. And then I always put Python as a nice to have because realistically, if you're thinking about taking the most lean path, you probably aren't actually going to get tested in Python when it comes to the live coding interview. If anything, it's definitely going to be SQL. And so it's going to be important to get up to a level where you're comfortable with CTEs and multiple joins with SQL, especially before you step into the interview process. Because sometimes I also notice that people spend so much time applying to jobs that once they actually get a live coding interview, they're like, oh shit, now I have to like cram in SQL in the next 3 days. So make sure that you're getting up to that working proficiency while you're applying and also before you get to the actual interview. Then the next brick is working in an organization. So this is actually really, really important for people who do not have experience working in a corporate environment. And by that, I mean, even people who are working as teachers, for example. There's a lot of math teachers who obviously have some of the math skills and the quantitative thinking, but they don't have the experience of working in an office and maybe like reporting to a manager and working in a team environment in what I would call more of a corporate setting. Same goes for people who are in academia. A lot of times, even if you've studied something that is technical and really related to data, there's still a bit of a transition that needs to be made for how your experience in academia translates to an office setting. Working in an organization gives you the experience of working in a team context, so knowing how to collaborate and coordinate with other people, how to report to a manager, how to also work with stakeholders, and all of this really comes together in giving you a sense of professional polish. And that shows through how you communicate with other people, even how you write emails, how you present, and all of that stuff needs to be had before you start applying to data jobs if you want to really stand out. And so the age-old question is always like, well, how do I get experience without experience? And there's two main ways that I'll suggest to you guys. So one is to volunteer with an organization. There's a few platforms that are really good for this. Catchafire is one of my favorite ones, where if you go to the volunteering page, you can filter down to data analysis skills so that you can find projects that are more relevant to working with data. And of course, you have to go through and look through the different projects and find the ones that are most relevant. But for example, Google Analytics setup and training. That's awesome because so many data jobs use Google Analytics. I actually had a student who was based in the UK, volunteered with Catchafire for about 6 months, and that experience gave him so much in-depth knowledge of working with Google Analytics and working with really large data sets that he was actually able to package this experience up and use it to land a job as a performance data analyst now working with Jaguar, which is really good for someone who didn't have previous data experience. Then another really good platform is Bluebonnet Data. So this is actually like a 3-month-long fellowship where you apply, you have a really quick conversation with someone just so that they understand your baseline skills. And for 3 months, you work as a campaign data analyst with other volunteers and team members on that campaign. And what's really cool about this one is that they actually give you mentorship throughout the program so that you're also learning how to be a data analyst on the real job as well. One of my students has also used Bluebonnet Data to land his first data job, where he used this as a transition step to working with data in a team context. Another good one is Volunteer Match, and this one you have to do a little bit more digging, but if you go to find opportunities, you can drill down into the skills and go to finance. And so here you can see reporting and dashboards. So you have to dig a little bit, but for example, this position down here, financial reporting design. This is a really great one because you would be working on establishing reporting methods and data standards for purposes such as grant applications. The other way to go about it is to create a freelance opportunity. And I say create because these kinds of opportunities are probably not going to just fall into your lap, but you can think creatively, just as really good data analysts do, about how to tap into your primary and secondary network to create some kind of work for yourself where you get access to real data and are using your technical skills to surface trends and insights that would be useful to that person. For example, there was a year where I had taken off of work to actually pursue becoming a full-time photographer. And in that time, I wanted to still work on some data projects just in case I ever wanted to come back to data, which obviously I did. And I went door to door to different stores in Brooklyn, and I took my resume that showed a little bit of my technical skills and basically said, hey, I can take your data on sales and inventory and expenses and surface trends to you about seasonality, what's working, what's not working, and give you some basic recommendations to help you understand how to make better use of this data. And I ended up working with a thrift store owner where I had set up spreadsheets for her to understand seasonality and also give recommendations about how she should allocate her resources for inventory in the coming months. So the next time a hiring manager asks, what kind of experience do you have working with data on a team? You're not going to respond with, well, I have a lot of points on Kaggle. Instead, you can actually bring this as a package and experience and talk about this in your interviews to show that you have that team context. This is basically the intermediary step to working as a full-time data analyst at a larger company. Now, the last brick that we need to lay is understanding how to actually deliver value. And there's a few main points here. One of them is understanding industry best practices. And by this, I mean understanding what are the ways that we actually design a dashboard that actually delivers insights in a really clear and understandable way, knowing the industry best practices around how to package up your insights and put all of those in a presentation, and even industry best practices about how to format your code so that it can be useful and clean for a data engineering team. I totally understand that this is one of the harder gaps for self-learned data analysts to fill because there's not a lot of information about this. So I will totally make a video for you guys about this. Domain knowledge and also standout communication and presentation. So domain knowledge is just having expertise or at least some background understanding about the business model and the business metrics that are relevant to that team. And most often the best data analysts are people who not just have the technical skills, but they really know how everything fits together in the context of the wider business. And so think about where there are experiences that you've had either in school or previous work that you can bring to the surface to make your domain knowledge stand out. For example, the student who used to work as a store manager. And so he had an understanding of how to calculate things like revenue, expenses, and manage inventory. And he really flexed this in interviews where he was talking about what it would be like to work with a sales ops team. Then standout communication and presentation. So this is just referring to how everything is all packaged up and how it all looks in terms of your presentations, your dashboards, and how you actually bring that to other people. So how you talk about it. So honing these skills and understanding the best practices, building some domain knowledge in one area and industry that you're interested in working in, and then also practicing your communication and your presentation. That is the way to lay this last brick of understanding how to deliver value. Then when you have these things, you can actually build a resume and a portfolio that can catch the eye of a recruiter. And so at that point, it is way more effective to start sending out job applications than before you have these bricks laid when you're just kind of spraying and praying. And so the next big idea that I want to talk about is that job hunting is not a numbers game. It's a game of strategy. A lot of times I hear people say, well, I've applied to a few hundred job postings and I got a couple interviews from that, but I failed the interview. So I just need to apply to more jobs. And I'm like, no, you don't. You need to refine your strategy for how to actually go about this entire process. So I always recommend being analytical in this process, right? If you see that something is not working, you need to step back, reevaluate, and think about, okay, are there certain bricks that I'm missing that I need to go back and work on before I start sending out these applications? And so there's a few main pillars here as well. One of them is to apply to the right jobs at the right time. And when I say right job, I'm talking about jobs where you can actually satisfy like 70% of what they put in the qualifications. If you can't satisfy 70% of many jobs, it means you actually need to go back to what I was talking about before and build those layers of technical knowledge, working in an organization, and also knowing how to deliver value. When you have that, you should be able to apply to a number of different data jobs with higher confidence. And then when I say applying at the right time, I'm talking about being within the first batch of people within 3 days of that job posting. Because these days, because everyone wants to work in analytics, there are so many people who are getting lost in this bucket of resumes that are not actually being read. And so one way to apply at the right time is to use other job boards than just LinkedIn. Audit.com is a really good one. It's mostly used for startups and tech companies where you actually put in your qualifications, you fill out a questionnaire, and then they match you with new job postings each week. So it's not like LinkedIn that just sends you notifications whenever a new job is posted and everyone's applying to that job. They're a little bit more tailored and picked for you. Then another job board is actually dataanalyst.com, where you can filter down to when it was last posted and also the office situation and the kind of industry. And another really good job board is actually businessanalyst.com. These two were created by the same person. I actually did an interview with the founder of both of these websites a few weeks ago, and he built these platforms to surface the best data and business analyst jobs in a more tailored way. And so check those out because they're not as popular as LinkedIn postings. And so it's more likely that you could be within the batch of the first 100 applicants when these jobs are posted. So if you guys have watched my resume video, you should know I am not a proponent of spraying and praying. Instead, what you need to use is strategic networking. And I have a video on networking here where I show you the exact template that my students use to get interviews within days, sometimes even hours. I've seen this happen multiple times because that message is so solid that a hiring manager couldn't even ignore it. And this is actually a shout out that I had from a student who's going to be in my next cohort. So thank you, June. He tried this out for himself and he got an interview within the same day. So it just goes to show you how quickly you can start to get interviews when you have the right package and you reach out to the right people. And the last thing I want you to think about through this entire process is how you can be the best option and not just any option. Right now, hiring managers, it's true, they do have a lot of options. And so of course, they're gonna pick the person who suits what they're looking for the most. And so think about what are things that are unique to your own experience, either from school or from work, or even your personality traits or your domain knowledge that can really stand out so that you can be the best match for that person and that future team. The third big idea that I want you guys to know is that portfolios are not primary proof. And what I mean by that is they do not really prove that you can do the job. Okay, sorry to break it to you, but if done right, the most that they could do is really just seal the deal once you're actually in the interview process and you want to show to a hiring manager the quality of your work. Realistically, these days, hiring managers are not actually spending that much time looking at your portfolios. They're really just important for you to build your own experience in working with data and packaging insights the way that you would for a stakeholder. Where I do see portfolio projects actually make a big difference is if you're in the later round of the interview stage and you send your portfolio to the hiring manager that you had a conversation with, or you even present one of your portfolio projects in one of the later rounds where you're asked to do a presentation, and the project is impressive enough that it actually shows your quality of work as someone who'd be working as a data analyst on their team. So for example, one student, Kevin, got a message from a hiring manager after he did an amazing interview, and it just gave the hiring manager even more confidence that Kevin was going to be a standout fit for this role because he could see the way that he delivered insights. And then I also had a student in the last cohort who actually got a job offer just 15 minutes after a 7-person panel interview where she presented one of the portfolio projects that we did. But again, that was in the way later round. So in the beginning, the most important thing is still to lay those bricks that I was talking about earlier on. When it comes to portfolios, the 3 main things I want you to look out for are 1, understanding the industry best practices. And like I said, there's a lot more about this topic. I will probably do another video about this in the future if you're interested. But what I mean by this is looking up how to structure code, how to structure dashboards, and how to structure documentation and presentations. The presentation and how everything is packaged is also really important because it's like the cherry on top to making sure that everything is represented as best as possible and that you're really showing the company relevance so that someone who'll be working on your team as a stakeholder or hiring manager can really see the so what behind your work. With all portfolios, it's always most important to have quality over quantity. I see a lot of people build more than like 4 projects, and it's focused a lot on the technical stuff, whereas it is much more effective to have 2 really good projects that show all of the things that I'm talking about here, and for it to be really easily accessible to a hiring manager to see all the meat of what you've done. Sometimes I see people like link their personal website, and then on their personal website, it links to their bio, and then in their bio, it goes to the projects. And then when you click on the project, then it goes to the insights, and you have to like dig basically 3 layers down to get down to the so what. Always surface that stuff just 1 click away so that someone can, click on your portfolio and immediately see all the value that you can bring to their team. So a few big picture action items that I will leave you guys with is 1, to build your bridge. So think about for you, what are the things that you're missing right now in your experience and how can you be creative and open-minded in filling those gaps? Then when you have those gaps filled, going about the job hunt process with a strategy instead of spraying and praying. A lot of times I think people spray and pray because they just want to feel like they're doing something, but then they get frustrated or overwhelmed when that something leads to nothing. But we all have the same 24 hours in a day. It's just about taking that time and allocating it to the things that are going to make the biggest difference. And then lastly, have the mindset of I want to be the best fit, because that is what is going to pierce through all the noise and make you really stand out throughout your job hunt process. I want to share some metrics that my students have been able to achieve in the last few months in today's really competitive job market, just so you have something to aim at. 1 is a 10% resume conversion rate, which means if you're sending out 50 applications, you should be getting like 5 interviews at least. And then sending out 10 applications plus 5 messages a week, that tends to work pretty well with my students because what I find is by 8 to 10 weeks, they send out about 100 applications. And on average, students in the program, when they get jobs during the program, they do so within sending 80 applications. So these are just some numbers to keep in mind for what's possible and what you can be aiming towards as you're going about this process. If you're on this journey and working towards becoming a data analyst and feeling some of the frustrations that I talked about earlier, just know 1, you're not alone, and 2, there's totally a way to overcome this. I broke into data myself years ago and then obviously was on the other side of hiring, and now my goal is to help more of you come into the industry. And it's definitely something that takes a good amount of resilience and patience and hard work, but it is very worth it to get to the other side. I think a lot of people want to work in data for its flexibility, its financial security, and just having more confidence in their technical skills in a growing technological world. And also hopefully more fulfillment. At least that's what I found myself, which is why I do what I do. And so just wanted to give you guys, a word of motivation to keep going, and you absolutely will get there, and I will see you there when you do.